What would actually happen if a single prehistoric human, a million years ago, was born with an IQ of 160? Not a slight edge, not a little sharper than the others around the fire. A full genius, by modern standards, the kind of mind that could master calculus, learn 6 languages, or design a bridge, dropped into a body walking the plains of early Homo erectus Africa, a million years before writing, before agriculture, before anyone had ever asked a question and expected a written answer back. You'd assume this person changes everything. Fire gets mastered faster. Tools get sharper. Maybe a wheel appears 500,000 years early. That's the intuitive guess almost everyone makes. And it's almost completely wrong, for reasons that reveal something uncomfortable about what intelligence actually is, and where it actually comes from. Let's start with the body this genius would be born into, because the mind doesn't exist in isolation from it. A million years ago, the average brain size of Homo erectus hovered somewhere around 900 to 1.100 cubic centimeters, compared to roughly 1.350 in modern humans. A raw IQ of 160 isn't just about raw processing power sitting inside a skull. It requires the physical hardware to run it, and that hardware is staggeringly expensive to operate. Researchers Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler, in a study widely known as the expensive tissue hypothesis, calculated that the human brain, despite making up roughly 2% of adult body weight, consumes something like 20% of the body's total energy at rest. Aiello and Wheeler argued that this kind of energy demand could only be sustained evolutionarily by a trade-off, specifically a reduction in another metabolically expensive organ, the gut, which became possible only once diets shifted toward more energy-dense, easier-to-digest food. In plain terms, a bigger, sharper brain isn't free. It has to be paid for, constantly, in calories. And a million years ago, calories were not a guaranteed daily line item. They were the entire, exhausting point of every single day. So here's the first collision between fantasy and reality. Our genius Homo erectus wakes up every morning with a brain burning through disproportionate amounts of energy, in a body that has to hunt, forage, and physically survive using nothing but that same limited caloric budget. A modern genius can sit in a chair, thinking, while food arrives through an economy built by millions of other specialized people. This genius has no such luxury. Thinking hard, in this world, competes directly with the muscle and metabolic energy needed to not starve. There's a very real chance a sharper mind, in this specific body, in this specific environment, burns calories faster than it can reliably replace them. Let's say our genius survives that problem. Through luck, through unusually good foraging territory. Whatever you want to grant the scenario. What happens next? This is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Because the next constraint isn't about the individual at all. It's about everyone else. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, studying the relationship between brain size, specifically neocortex size, and social group size across primates, proposed what's now widely known as the social brain hypothesis. And one of its most cited implications is a rough upper limit on stable social relationships a human brain can meaningfully maintain, a number popularly known as Dunbar's number, often estimated around 150. A million years ago, Homo erectus groups were almost certainly far smaller than that, likely numbering in the dozens rather than the hundreds. That matters enormously for our genius, because even a spectacular new idea, a smarter way to nap a stone tool, a clever new hunting strategy, a better method for keeping a fire alive overnight, only becomes historically meaningful if it spreads. And it can only spread as fast and as far as the social network around that one person allows. Picture the actual scene. Your genius figures out something genuinely brilliant. Let's say a more efficient way to strike stone that produces a sharper, more durable cutting edge with fewer wasted strikes. In a modern context, that insight could be photographed, described, and shared with millions of people within hours. In this context, it has to be demonstrated, physically, repeatedly, to a group of maybe 20 to 40 people, most of whom have their own daily survival tasks pulling their attention elsewhere. None of whom have any framework for evaluating whether this new technique is actually better or just different. There's no journal, no shared vocabulary for describing a subtle technical improvement, no guarantee the next generation learns it correctly, or at all. If the person who understood it best dies of infection, or falls off a cliff, or simply gets outcompete for food during a bad season before they've fully taught anyone else. This is the counterintuitive core of the whole thought experiment, and it's worth sitting with directly. Anthropologist Joseph Henrich, whose research focuses heavily on what he calls cumulative culture, has argued, across multiple studies and a well-known synthesis of the evidence, that human technological and cultural achievement depends less on the raw intelligence of any single individual and more on the size and interconnectedness of the social network transmitting and refining ideas over generations. Henrich's research points to cases where isolated populations, cut off from larger trading and cultural networks, actually lost sophisticated technologies over time, not because the people became less intelligent, but because the network sustaining and improving that knowledge collapsed. A single brilliant mind, in other words, isn't the primary engine of human progress. The engine is the collective, cumulative, generational transmission of small improvements across as many connected minds as possible. One genius, however capable, is a single node, and a single node, no matter how bright, cannot replicate what an entire connected network does automatically, almost invisibly, over the span of centuries. So let's reconstruct what actually happens to your million-year-old genius, scene by scene, because it's worth walking through concretely rather than abstractly. They grow up faster thinking than everyone around them, noticing patterns in animal migration, weather, and stone fracture that others miss. They likely become useful, respected even, within their small group, perhaps taking on an outsized role in decisions about when to move camp or how to approach a hunt. That's a real, meaningful advantage, and it shouldn't be dismissed. But it's a local advantage, bounded by the size of the group they belong to, and it dies with them unless it happens to get passed on cleanly to at least one capable successor. In a world with no writing, no drawings preserved for future study, and average adult lifespans that could be cut short at any point by infection, injury, or simple bad luck. Now here's the twist within the twist, because this is where the thought experiment becomes genuinely strange rather than simply disappointing. Some of that same intelligence might not manifest as technological invention at all. It might manifest as something almost invisible to us now: superior social navigation, a mind capable of modeling other people's intentions with unusual precision, predicting group tension before it erupts, negotiating access to resources through subtle diplomacy rather than raw physical dominance. In a small hunter-gatherer band, that kind of intelligence might matter more for survival and reproductive success than any single clever tool modification. Precisely because Dunbar's social brain hypothesis suggests brain size itself may have evolved primarily to manage complex social relationships, not to solve abstract engineering problems. Your genius might leave no archaeological trace at all, and still have been the most cognitively remarkable person alive on the planet that year, simply because the thing they were best at doesn't fossilize. Here's the mirror, and it's worth sitting with before you go. You live in a world absolutely saturated with the accumulated output of millions of connected minds across thousands of years. Language itself, written record, standardized measurement, shared scientific method, global trade networks moving both goods and ideas. When you learn something today, you're rarely discovering it from scratch. You're downloading it, instantly and almost effortlessly, from an enormous collective inheritance that took an almost incomprehensible number of individual minds, most of them unremarkable, working together across unimaginable spans of time. To build your own intelligence, whatever it happens to be, gets enormously amplified by simply being plugged into that network. Pull a modern person with an ordinary IQ out of that network entirely, and drop them alone in true isolation with no tools, no language partners, no accumulated knowledge to draw on. And their raw problem-solving ability alone would struggle to reinvent even a small fraction of what they currently take for granted. What would actually happen if a single prehistoric human, 1,000,000 years ago, was born with an IQ of 160? Almost nothing that would show up in any history book. Because history, as it turns out, was never really written by lone geniuses in the first place. It was written by networks of ordinary minds, imperfectly but persistently passing small improvements to each other, generation after generation, until the accumulation itself became the genius. Your brilliant, isolated ancestor from 1,000,000 years ago wasn't missing intelligence. They were missing the one thing intelligence alone has never been able to substitute for: enough other connected minds to build something bigger than any single one of them could ever manage alone.